Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another session of the ATP Ride Report webinar series. My name is Ashley Pallon. I oversee the airline and corporate partnerships and alumni services for ATP Flight School. Thanks for tuning in for this session, Career Path Outlook on Flying for a Part 135 Aircraft Management Company. Today, I'm so excited to announce that we're going to be joined by Ari Sarmento. He's the System Chief Pilot for Jet Linx, and Jeff Kircher, he's the Houston-based Chief Pilot. Some ground rules for those of you that have joined with us before we get started. Your microphones are muted for the duration of this session. If you need to convey anything to us, audio quality, feedback, the bottom right has a chat bar. Feel free to talk to us in there. And then if you have questions for Ari and Jeff, we will have a Q&A session at the end, and just go ahead and put those in the Q&A area. That's the bottom center of your toolbar. And finally, for this week, we will go ahead and launch our poll to get to know a little bit more about you guys, and just let us know which of these aircraft would you be most interested in flying. So we're seeing some Beechcraft, some Citations, Falcons, Gulfstreams, Learjets. Awesome. All right, Challengers. All right. Go ahead and share that with you guys real quick. Looks like Gulfstreams are the most or the highest interest, so that's awesome. And just to let you guys know, thank you for submitting those answers. I have good news for you. No matter which of those aircraft you chose, all of them are options at Jet Linx. But we'll get to that in a second. At this time, I'd like to welcome Ari and Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
So I'm sure we could make an entire webinar just out of discussing each of your backgrounds, but could you each take a moment to just tell us a little bit about your background, how long you've been with Jet Linx?
Jeff, why don't you go first?
Yes, sir. So I started flying in high school. I went to a military academy outside of Philadelphia. Took lessons after high school at a Part 61 school outside of Philadelphia at Montgomery Field in Bluebell, PA. Did some single engine flying for a maintenance center, flying aircraft back and forth, and gaining some turbine experience before heading off to the regionals at Republic, flying the 170, 175, and 190 for Frontier. Spent 4.5 years doing that, and then went on to Jet Linx, where I've been for almost 5 years.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I started my career in high school. At the age of 16, I started flying. Went to college out in California, and after graduating, started with American Airlines, spent about 15 years with them in Dallas at the headquarters campus, doing several different jobs in operations, flight training, recruiting, and that type of stuff. In 2000, I took an early retirement and went into the corporate 135 world, worked for a charter company on Long Island at the Islip Airport for about 5 years, flying a Hawker 700 and also a King Air 200. From there, I relocated to the Atlanta area, spent about 6 years with FlightWorks as their chief pilot, DO, and director of government operations, where I spent about off and on about 3.5 to 4 years in Afghanistan doing military support. Then came back to the US and flew for a 121 supplemental operator on a Embraer 145 as their chief pilot. And then spent about 2.5 years with Jet Linx. Then from Jet Linx, I did depart and went to work for a corporate Part 91 operator flying a G650, and did that for about 2-3 years. And I've been back now at Jet Linx for about 8 months, and of all the different charter companies I've worked for, I enjoy Jet Linx the best.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of information about each of you. And so following up, Jeff, your operation is unique in that you guys have bases all across the contiguous US, but you really seems to embrace the local kind of customer service aspect and empower your employees to be your local brand ambassadors with your owners. For a pilot that is interested in flying for Jet Linx, how are bases assigned?
Bases are assigned by openings on aircraft. So we hire in type of aircraft for openings for PIC and SIC for specific airframes rather than bases being assigned through initial training like the airlines or most other companies. So what we'll do is we'll put an open requisition for, like, say, Indianapolis or Scottsdale, where you see the open positions on the screen. We'll hire into that account specifically, rather than signing somebody into a position, 2 or 3 weeks down the line. So where we differ is we hire per account rather than per base.
Okay. And with that, we kind of alluded to this in our poll, Ari, but you do have a very diverse fleet. How many aircraft do you have in total?
We have around 105. It's currently a state of flux. A few people are adding, a few people are removing, and that varies over 32 different types across 46 different variants of aircraft. So we have the Citation product line, the Hawker 800, 800 XP, 900, 900 XP. So those are all the same type of different variants. And so we have the Beechjet 400, and we have the Beechjet 400 Nexton. So the differences usually tend to be the avionics package in a specific aircraft. And then when you do get a type rating in that aircraft, we give you differences training from one variant to the other.
Okay, perfect. And how often are aircraft relocated?
When you say relocated, you mean from one base to the other?
Yes. Does that ever happen? Or if someone were to start with you at one specific base under an owner, is that going to be where they'll be for the duration or foreseeable for future?
Yes, most of our owners are locally based individuals who have their aircraft with us at a local base. And so if you're hired onto that aircraft, let's say you get hired on in Atlanta to a Beechjet, that owner is probably has a business there, and that airplane is going to be there for the duration at the time the aircraft is with us. However, if you are a employee in good standing and there's a G4 in Teterboro and you'd like to upgrade to it, you can apply for that position, and we would consider all internal candidates first before entertaining an external candidate to provide an upgrade path for our existing employees.
Okay, perfect. And then, Jeff, there are different areas of operations that you have within Jet Linx. You have the jet cards, the aircraft management, acquisition, sales. Since your pilots are type rated, how does that play into which pilots may handle those relocations during an acquisition?
So we do have a lot of different departments assisting our pilots in different varying functions of their duties, which makes their job easier and allows team input. So it's a little overlap of coverage and responsibility for everybody, so as to not let anybody have a chance to make a mistake. Now, if somebody would look to make a relocation to a different base, we do that all the time. That's not an unusual thing for us. I had 3 pilots go to various bases in the last year, great employees, and they upgraded on their aircraft. So we do provide those opportunities, as well as management opportunities within the company.
And then, Ari, what does what would a typical schedule look like for a Jet Linx pilot?
So a typical schedule is our pilots request 8 days off a month, and they do that about a month in advance.
Okay.
And so that way we can look at demand on the aircraft, what's the aircraft owner going to do, what kind of maintenance, what kind of training do we have, and who wants what days off. And if you're on an aircraft with 3 people, we always ask the 3 individuals to talk amongst themselves and see who wants which days. We don't have a seniority program, so it's a family-oriented environment, so we try to be very fair on which weekends we grant to which individuals. So the most senior guy isn't always getting the weekend off. It's a fair process. So if you're on a 3-man crew, somebody's going to get Thanksgiving off, somebody's going to get New Year's off, and somebody's going to get Christmas off for the most part. You also get 2 weeks of PTO, and sometimes individuals don't want 8 days a month. We buy those days back if they don't want them, and if we need them, we'll buy some days back. We do meet all of the requirements of 13 days of rest periods within a quarter, so we make sure we track all that internally. But a have a 4 and 8 schedule or anything of that nature.
Awesome.
And
Jeff,
I will add on to that with Ari. Typically across our fleet, our average pilots are flying between 10 and 14 days a month, given across all our aircraft and bases.
okay. What does that now, Jeff? What does that equate to as far as flight time a pilot can expect to accrue annually?
So some accounts are flying more than others, but I would say on average about 250 to 350 is our sweet spot for crews and pilots to be flying per year, depending on which market and which airplane they're flying.
Okay. And Ari, if someone is, I know you guys probably have some pilots that fly for Jet Linx long-term as a full career, but if someone is interested in maybe making the transition to jump to 121 ops at some point, you also have a pathway outlined. Can you tell us a little bit more about your partnership with Southwest?
Sure, absolutely. I've been working closely with Dee on our team to develop the pathways. She has been doing it a lot longer than I. She's been working on it for about 2 years, but we do have an official agreement with Southwest, and we've defined several different kind of pathways. The agreement with Southwest is a zero-time pilot can enter the Destination 225 pathway, and they would start as a cadet, get all of their ratings about 18 months. They would be ready to come and fly for Jet Linx, fly for us for about 3 years in good standing, and then continue on to Southwest. We also have pathways where if the individual comes to us with a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, or a military background, that allows us the ability to bring them on with less than 1,500 hours of flight time. So we can go as low as 500, 700, and 1,000 hours if their training background is one of those categories. And then we have industry standards boards such as Argus and Wyvern that sort of tell the industry, well, this pilot should have this much flight time if they're going to be an SIC or a PIC. So we try to work with those organizations to let them know what kind of training we're doing and what the background of the individual has been up to this point, and that gives us a little bit of more leeway in the recruiting and hiring lower time pilots. We also have situations where maybe it's an employee for Southwest who's a dispatcher and has his instrument rating. There's a pathway for that individual to come to us, fly for us, and then go back to Southwest and fly the 737s. We're also looking at other airlines to provide a pathway to, and we're also looking at different organizations to provide a pathway to us. So companies like yourself or other operators of piston aircraft or other entities, we can work with them to let them know, here's the kind of training we're looking for, and if you can provide that kind of training, then they can enter into the pathway. We also have existing Jet Linx employees that might want to have an opportunity to go to Southwest. So we have an agreement that they will give us a certain amount of slots for their semi-annual employee. It's not an interview, but it's an event that they hold to start weeding out the possible contenders. So those are some of the things we're working on. Dee is working really hard on a few additional airlines and groups to work with. So she's been an excellent resource for that. And there'll be more to come on that as well.
Can't wait to hear about it. Awesome. Jeff, so you are the base chief pilot at Houston. What do you think the most rewarding part of your career has been so far at Jet Linx?
With Jet Linx, in my current position, I would say helping people obtain their goal aircraft or what they want to fly. So maybe I hired them on to fly a light jet, but their goal is to fly a heavy jet. Watching them fly through the light jet program and putting a year on service on that plane and being able to apply for a heavy jet and getting that job, and then watching them become captains on that plane is probably my greatest and rewarding part of this job, is giving people the opportunities that they're working hard for.
Awesome. Ari, if someone is interested in applying and they're approaching ATP minimums or beyond, what is something they can do to really make themselves stand out as a competitive candidate to Jet Linx?
So one of the things that I always recommend individuals to do when they go for that interview, especially with a charter company like us, you have a certain set of credentials and you have a certain set of experience that companies like you have already identified that they can fly the airplane. So we ask that you be yourself, you be comfortable, and that during the interview, we're trying to get to know how well you will fit in with everybody else. The process is pretty laid back. It's not very strenuous. We're looking for the type of person and how well they'll fit in with everybody. You'll interview with Jeff. You could also interview with myself if Jeff's not available. Then you would interview with your potential coworkers, and then you would interview with the base president, and then ultimately you could also interview with the aircraft owner. And in all of those, we just ask that you be yourself. Don't try to memorize any scripted responses. Being authentic and relaxed is probably the best recommendation I can make. Obviously, there's things that if you fail a check ride, be upfront. We're not going to disqualify you if you do fail a check ride. We just want to know what the parameters around it were. Obviously, if there's other things in your background, we do a background check. We ask you to tell us about those things because we're going to find out about it. And if the two things match, all's good.
And Jeff, last question before we get to some viewer Q&A. If you had one piece of advice to give our viewers, what would it be?
It would be to be humble and to never turn down a learning experience, whether it's from your co-pilot or your captain, or whether you're a captain and learning from your co-pilot. Never take the opportunity to learn something.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you both. I have a question too, just in dealing with all of this COVID-19 that has been happening. How has that, can you speak a little bit about how that's affected your operations and maybe some changes and safety precautions that you guys have put in place to keep your team members and your flight crew safe?
Sure. So the first thing we did was disinfect our entire fleet and then treat it with a biotech nanotechnology, which is, it's a non-chemical application of a product that kills any virus in any type of droplet that comes in contact with the surface of the aircraft. So every aircraft interior was treated with that. All of our 18 locations were also treated with that. We have coordinated with our safety and security department to get face masks for all of our employees. We've identified which aircraft and how many passengers it can carry safely to maintain 6 feet of separation. Safety briefings are done through the PA system or through a FaceTime with the passengers from the cockpit. So those are all safety measures. Most of our locations in our National Operations Center, we're all working remotely from home. And hand sanitizer on every aircraft as well. So those are some of the precautions. Obviously, with the stay home orders that many states had, and some of those are changing now, we went from an average of perhaps 170 flights a day down to maybe 10, 12. We're getting back up. This past week, we saw as many as 40 flights a day. So we do see an uptick and a trend where it's getting busier. And I suspect that with the continued presence of this type of situation, there'll probably be more people that want an aircraft to themselves than sharing an aircraft with the general public. So I'm confident that that will be something that we will see pick up.
All right, so guys, thank you for both Ari and Jeff for taking the time to really discuss career opportunities. At this time, we will begin the viewer Q&A. We did receive a couple questions via email. The first one was from Dustin. He's actually one of our alumni. He's actually in Nebraska. He had mentioned for your captain positions, would you ever sign a training contract for pilots that don't already have that aircraft specific type rating?
Yes. So the way it works, whether you're a captain or an SIC, we're going to give you the same type rating for that aircraft. So if you're going to be duty assigned as an SIC, you're still going to go through training and get a PIC type ride. So we ask that you sign a training contract for a year, and that training contract is prorated over 12 months. So if for some reason after 6 months you depart, we're going to ask you to reimburse us for the remainder 6 months. After the year is up, that is evaporated, and that's that.
Awesome. And then the next question we had was, are all of your pilots full-time? Do you employ some contract pilots? What would that look like? What are different opportunities there?
I would say that 98% of our pilots are full-time employees. We do employ contract pilots from time to time, and it gives them more flexibility to pursue other avenues of aviation or a different career. But I'd say a majority of our pilots are full-time pilots.
Okay. And it looks like our first other viewer question here. It looks like we have a lot of questions about Destination 225. So maybe if we can just go into more detail about the different entry points and eligibility for that.
Sure. So Destination 225, the requirements are an application to the program Destination 225. There's a link for that on our website, and Southwest also has a wonderful website for Destination 225. You don't have to have any flight time. They do an aptitude test that will help them determine if you're a good candidate. And the test it's about a 3-hour test, I think it is. It's online. Then after the test is done, they review it. They have a phone interview with you, and their team asks questions. The test itself is not pass or fail. It's just a way for them to guide what kind of questions they're going to ask you. You enter the Destination 225 program with 0 flight hours. Then you go to the cadet school. That's about 18 months. And then during that process, you're going to be in contact with a Southwest representative, a mentor throughout that process. And as you get to the end of the cadet program, you will be introduced to one of 2 charter companies, Jet Linx being one, and there is one other company. You'll be introduced to both companies, and then you'd be able to make a decision on which one you might want to continue your flying with. And then we would find a spot for you, and you'd be employed with us for the 3 years, and then you would then return to Southwest. During that 3-year period, you will still be mentored by that Southwest individual. So it'll be a collaboration between them keeping tab on you, and then how are we doing, making sure our training meets their requirements as well, so that the progression can continue. So that's the most traditional Destination 225 pathway. I did mention if you already have your CFI or your ATP and you have a 2-year degree, 4-year degree, or military, there's several other avenues to the pathway to us from that aspect.
Perfect. Yeah, it looks like Riley was just asking so as far as if someone was coming from ATP, they would transition or they would apply to you and then have the option to kind of enter at that point once they're with you.
Correct. That is a little bit different in that there is and I believe, and I'll have to ask Dee if they do the Southwest aptitude test with a 2-year degree or 4-year degree or the military pathway. I believe yes, but I will double check that.
Okay. Perfect. Just look through. Oh, Jeff, you're taking my.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're going through and answering them all. Well, I'm going to look through these real quick just in case some other.
I was just asking some questions out
Hey,
while
that's
Ari's
that's
talking.
great. I'm just looking through in case some of our other attendees would like to hear it. We do have some participants on Facebook Live right now watching. So, can you discuss just initial training? How long, once you're hired with Jet Linx, how long it takes to get that initial type rating and what the onboarding process is like?
Yeah,
Jeff?
so our initial in-doc is about 1 week long. Then you're immediately scheduled into a flight safety program for the PIC training. That can vary, but some airframes are as short as 3 weeks, and some are as long as I imagine a Gulfstream 650 is almost a month long, maybe a month and a half. If you're in a mid-size or larger, you're going to go to international procedures class, which is another 3 days. So I'd say your training footprint from in-doc to getting your type rating to the international training, that could be about a month. And during our training, all your hotels are paid for. You get car rentals, you get all your foods paid for, and you're on salary from day one.
Awesome.
And then
And
can I add to that?
of course.
So depending on the pathway you come to us, let's say you're an individual that only has 500 or 700 hours and has no turbine time. We are working with a few organizations to set up a turbine transition program so that before they go off for their type, they're going to get some training in a turbine aircraft so that they can have that experience under their belt and they're not going directly cold turkey into a jet.
And can you discuss, 'cause it looks like Brent had asked what percentage of your maybe pilots come to you with having some prior turbine experience or just a different background other than just building through either a 61 or 141, 142 school. So as far as military experience or maybe 135, 121.
I would say for people with previous airline experience, and that includes retirees, people from the regionals, I'd say it's a good 50-50 mix on new hires with that. Military is a lot smaller for us. I would say maybe 25% of our pilots are going to be military, active duty, or reserves. And the other mix would be the corporate guys that have only worked corporate or 135 their entire career. So we do have a good mix of pilots and experience.
And it looks like Sophie was wondering, Sophie, I think that they're talking about the potential of when maybe you could start looking into some of these programs, but she said, can you elaborate on how the process would work if you were a CFI with a degree and looking to get hired on at some of those lower thresholds?
So we have posted several job openings on our website. We've also put in there several for Destination 225 applicants. And then I think I will be working with our talent team to add other pathways that they could apply for. But if she went online and applied for any one of the SIC positions, we would definitely look at her background and say, this is a person that fits this pathway. Let's go ahead and chat with her.
Awesome. So guys, sorry for before when I was sharing screen, but here you just go to jetlinx.com and in the upper right-hand corner, there's careers. And if you scroll down, you can view more information. And then if you keep going, you'll be able to see normal hiring requirements for PIC, SIC, and then also some of these different job opportunities. So with these, this is an actual need at each of these locations, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And if you notice the Destination 225 University Pilot Pathway and Southwest Employee Pathway, those are not exact needs. Those are just to capture their information so that we'll have it on file.
But for anyone that is interested that might have 1,500, so at this point they would be eligible for, this is a real need right now for this SIC position. Perfect.
Yep, that is correct.
And guys, if you want to see all the locations that they have, you can go here. So Jeff, you oversee Houston, correct?
That's correct. Houston and assist the NOC with recruiting and being their brand ambassador.
Okay, Perfect. So Atlanta, Austin, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, Detroit, Fort Worth, Houston, Indy, Nashville, New York, Omaha, San Antonio, Scottsdale, a lot of locations if you guys are interested. St. Louis, Tulsa, DC, and
some more on the way next year.
yes.
Now, even though we have all of those locations, our National Operations Center is in Omaha, and we operate under one FAA certificate, and we are managed by the Lincoln FSDO. And so our principal operations inspector is based there. We also have a principal maintenance inspector and an avionics inspector. And so that's the FAA office that I interact with as the chief pilot for the company.
Okay. And so something that I thought was really neat is just how involved you guys are with safety. I know that the other day you had a safety summit, and it sounds like you hold that annually. Can you talk about how that plays into, because you have now had the Argus Platinum, correct, certification since 2007?
Yep. So safety at Jet Linx starts with the CEO, Jamie Walker. He is dedicated to conducting the safety stand down. That means that we will cease operations for 2 days and focus on safety and reviewing our SMS program, our ASAP program, and we had a few guest speakers this session as well, excellent guest speakers. And so the focus on safety is a continuous process. We also have fatigue mitigation. So we look at a person's well-being to do a trip and make sure that we're not burning people out. And so we're always constantly looking at the parameters of a trip. You know, is it going to be bad weather? Are they landing at midnight in mountainous terrains? These are all things that we're going to do risk assessments and see what we can do to mitigate those type of things.
Okay. Sophie, looks like we had a question from you. I believe that Jeff already answered this, but we'll go over again how many hours on average your pilots fly a month.
I would say on average a monthly would probably be between 20 and 45 hours.
Okay. And in the SIC application, it describes that you'll work with the right candidate to obtain your ATP. Can you just talk about what that means?
Sure. We do like to have people with their ATP written done. That way, when we send you off to the flight training portion of the sim training, the ATP ride is almost identical to the type ride. So we'll sponsor you to get your ATP at the same time doing the type.
Okay. Perfect. And Brent would like to know if you can discuss a typical trip, domestic, international, and then does the crew stay with the aircraft, and maybe just describe the interactions with owners and what their preference is as far as returning or staying with them.
Jeff, I'll let you take that one.
So let's just talk about a typical 3-day domestic trip. You could, with an owner, if you're flying with your owner, you're most likely going to stay with the airplane. So let's just say you go to Colorado for the weekend, you're going to be there with the owner with a return date in mind already. Now, if you're on an open market charter or just a regular charter without your owner, you could be on the road for 4 days with a return. But in those 2 days, days 2 and 3, you could be assigned to a different charter and then return that on the 4th day to pick up that charter to bring it back home.
Okay. And on those charters, is that, I mean, since there's a lot of interaction between the pilots and the crew and obviously your owners, is that something that maybe if you can give some tips as far as the interview process for interested applicants of how that plays into ultimately what looks like a valuable, well-rounded pilot and team member at Jet Linx?
Yeah, most of our owners are very much concerned with the fit of the individual. Are they relaxed? Are they being themselves? Are they being an individual that's going to have a command of authority? And so most owners want somebody that'll be a great fit, knowledgeable. There are some owners that don't even want to do the interviewing and never participate in the interviewing. And then there's some that, they want to participate in the interviewing and they're very hands-on. And that's sometimes is a good thing or a bad thing, because I've seen sometimes owners will ask questions of pilots and it's probably not an appropriate question. Like, why did the tire cost so much money to get replaced? Well, the pilot's the pilot, not the mechanic, and he had no involvement in the tire. So we during training, we make sure that every individual knows what's appropriate communications and then what's not appropriate communications. Even with charter customers, sometimes a pilot will use a technical word and the passenger doesn't say anything, but will call back later to say that, oh my God, he scared me because he said takeoff power and I thought he was going to pull the power off. So they're small airplanes, so the passengers can hear what you're saying to your coworkers up front.
And Brent said thank you for the answering his questions, and he also was curious if there is not an opening at the base that he's interested in. Can he submit a general application, or should he wait for a specific position to be listed?
You can.
So I don't think we have a general application, do we, Jeff?
We do. We do have a general application, and it wouldn't hurt to reach out if you're in a different base location and rather than Houston or Texas where I can't help you out. Call the local office and find out who the base chief pilot is, or email me and Ari, and we will designate the person who's in charge over there, the base chief pilot, and get you his contact information, and you can start a dialogue with that if there's no open positions.
Absolutely.
And it looks like can you elaborate more on the programs that you have for contract pilots, since it looks like most of the postings are geared towards the full-time employment? How would someone proceed with that position? What are the minimum requirements? Are there only specific aircraft that contract pilot positions are available for?
So we use a lot of contracts on beach jets and Excels. Most of our contract pilots are already qualified on the aircraft. And if they are qualified, then we pay them a day rate to use them. And then we usually put a relationship in place and say, hey, how many days a month can we use you this month, next month? We've had a few situations where individuals were not qualified on the aircraft, and we got them the training. And then we negotiated that we would pay for the training, but since we're paying them a day rate and they're not a full-time employee, that we would ask them to work throughout the year for about 10 days gratis to cover the expense of the training. So there's always a relationship that we can review to see what the best course of action would be. But the contractors are a case-by-case situation to help fill certain aircraft that the owner only wants 2 people instead of 3 people, and maybe somebody needs to go to training and I need to cover 2 weeks of that training period with a contractor type of thing.
Thank you. And with the owners, I think that in listening into that safety summit, something that I took away that was just amazing was the interactions that they had with your pilots during this time, and ensuring that continued employment is there and really valuing them as an asset. Is that something that you could maybe speak to a little bit?
Sure. So many of our owners, most all of them, have chosen to continue the aircraft ownership and have their aircraft. So all of our pilots, while not flying very much, are employed. And many of our aircraft owners, some of our aircraft owners said, hey, I don't want my pilot flying on the airlines right now, so don't send him anywhere. And so we abide by that if that's something the owner wants. So I'm very fortunate that we've been able to hold on to many of our pilots. In fact, all of them. We have them. There have been a few that the owner has sold the aircraft. We have a floater pool of pilots, and these are full-time employees that aren't assigned to an aircraft today. So we have them in a pool that we can use across the system as needed to help fill in.
Awesome. And looks like we have, it's from Anonymous. Can you speak to maybe some things that would assist someone in potentially being hired or below ATP minimums? Is there any type of experience that you would look at that would help weigh on that, aside from the restricted ATP categories?
Right. So obviously, depending on their pathway, if it's a 2-year, 4-year, or 1,000 hours or military, if we had somebody come to us and they didn't have that, we're looking at establishing relationships that we can say, well, if you have your CF5, why don't you go here and do some more flight training and get your time up? Or maybe a Cape Air option might be a good way for them to get their flight time up as well. So we're looking at establishing those relationships and those recommendations. So as Jeff mentioned, we're happy to give out our email addresses and can have a conversation with whomever. I also would recommend that finding a mentor that you can sort of use to give you direction as well is very important. So that way you can sort of focus, where do you want to go and how do I get there? And what are some options to get there?
Perfect. Brett would like to know, can you discuss company ambitions as far as how many aircraft or owners or crew are a target over time? The flexibility of that you're talking about really seems, he says, it seems like wonderful flexibility. And he's just interested in hearing more about that.
Sure. We're always looking to expand. I think Jeff mentioned we're looking to expand to a few new areas. I know that we're looking at Florida. We're also looking at the West Coast. I know that Jamie Walker has also said that within the next, I believe, 5 to 10 years, we'd have international locations as well. So, world domination.
I'm scrolling through because I know there was someone that had a question too about or mentioned Open Florida. So I'm sure they're very happy to hear about that.
Yeah.
What percentage of your flights are international versus domestic?
I don't have an exact number, but I do know that we do a lot of work into Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, Bermuda. We do have G4s, G450, G550 we had, Challengers, Embraer 135s. All of those do a lot of international trips for owners and charter. We do a whole lot more domestic than we do international, but we do a lot of international. So much so that, this morning we had a online session for all of our pilots on going international and then coming back into the United States, and what do you have to do to come back in, because that's
customs.
A set of rules. So we do it. We do a lot in, I think, Jeff, you probably do a lot into Mexico from down there.
Yep, Mexico. I do a lot of South America as well. I'd say at least a dozen times a year down to Colombia or any of the countries down there. Central America a lot, and the Caribbean, and
okay.
Hawaii and Alaska.
And then with, aside from the training that you just mentioned today, for pilots that might be at a base that they are experiencing a little bit more of that international navigation, how are they onboarded, or what can they do maybe in advance to prepare for that type of flying if it's not something they've seen, if they're coming up through a flight school or university or something like that?
I will say we do a great job of, if you're hired into a plane that's anticipating for international travel, of getting you prepared in dog for that, and also going to flight safety for the international procedures class, where it's 3 days of talking about entry and exits of airspaces, slot procedures. It just, it's mind-boggling how much that somebody can talk about airspace in 3 days.
And,
And
and they,
you'll also get that experience flying with an experienced captain. So if we do hire you on as an SIC, you're not going to be with a new captain. You're going to be with somebody that's been on that aircraft for at least a year, or if not longer.
Someone was asking about potential West Coast locations, but I'm sure they'll announce that as soon as they're able to. But you have some interested pilots that are excited for when that anticipated base opens.
so are we.
All right. And I think that we went over this, but we'll touch on it again. As far as expanding operations, including 225, is that something that's something that all pilots are eligible for at Jet Linx, or a transition, not just it's, so I think they're asking about captains specifically.
Everyone is
everyone.
Yeah, everyone is open to it as long as they're in good standing.
Okay. Perfect. Then, what advice would you have for someone that is a first generation pilot that maybe is starting this out, doesn't have any family in it?
I can answer that because I'm a first generation pilot myself. Persistence, and never give an opportunity to network, because you never know who's going to know anybody. You know, just before this call, me and Ashley got on here, and apparently me and her spoke about, I think, 8 or 9 years ago. So you never know where the industry is going to take you, and it's very small. So always say hi and be friendly.
That is great advice.
Yeah, it is a very small industry. So, you know, I had, when I was in Afghanistan, I had many pilots work for me, and that was about 8 years ago. And recently was at a event with some ex-military pilots. And halfway through the event, I realized that this was one of my employees speaking, because he told a few stories. I was like, wait a minute. I was that guy.
And, see, guys, I really, that is such a huge point, though. This industry, you will see people again and again, and it's great to make those networking connections and establish them, and you never know where they'll be able to take you. So very sound advice there. And so for, just going to pull up your website. Can you talk a little bit more about your Jet Card program, and maybe how that's different from other operations, and how that might
Sure.
influence and affect a pilot?
Sure. So unlike other charter companies, the general public doesn't call us for a ride. They either have to go through a broker, or they're a Jet Card member. And we have 3 kinds of membership, and they're at 3 different levels. And each of these memberships provide you with the ability to get access to an aircraft within 48 hours or whatever the time frame is. And most the cards are set up for light jet, medium jet, super mid, and heavy. So if you have a membership for a light jet, you might get upgraded into a medium-sized aircraft. But the membership also gets you access to our physical locations at the airport. So we have these 18 locations, but they're only for our card members, not the general public. Some people would equate that to an FBO, but it's a little nicer than an FBO in that it's private, it's secluded. There's a full coffee bar, drink bar, facilities, meeting rooms, and stuff like that. So you are greeted by a concierge at the local base, and then the airplane parks right outside of our facilities, and then you're escorted onto the aircraft by the local base member. So it's sort of like a private golf course, right? You get to go golfing, or you can stay at the clubhouse and just chat or do whatever you want.
And so with that, really, if you're a pilot assigned to that base, you're seeing you're a very tight knit group with your local not FBO, but your local staff on site there. Awesome. Now, can you speak to, you have that National Operations Center. How do pilots, do they work on everything with dispatch locally? Do you have dispatchers? Is there someone that they're able to call if maybe they have a question aside from their base or chief pilot, and maybe it's after hours? What type of support system do you have?
So we do have a pseudo dispatch. We don't have licensed dispatch. That's the job of the PIC, to work closely with the NOC's Department of Flight Control, we call them, where they assist with just about everything besides flight planning and fuel planning for the pilots, where they'll handle all the customer requests, all the hotel requests and transportation for the passengers, and they'll also check NOTAMs, TFRs. But again, that's the PIC's ultimate responsibility, is protect himself and his crew and his passengers, to make sure that he's not busting any airspace. So when a pilot does have a question, we do have a domestic flight control department, and we also have an international team as well they're handling all the permits and flyovers and any airspace or handling questions that the international team can take.
And then are they also able to provide support, or do you have a maintenance support if maybe you went somewhere and there's a question? And obviously if you're, you're the pilot, you're not necessarily the A&P, so you're a little bit unsure. Yeah. Is there safety support as far as that also?
Yes, so we do. It's the same thing with the FC department. We have a maintenance control department. So when the aircraft's not in base, we call the NOC FC, and we let them know we have a maintenance issue. We then write up the aircraft in the logbook, send an email to the maintenance department. They'll mark it red in the system, and we cannot dispatch until we get that either MEO'd or fixed or cleared, pilot cleared in the FOS system. No one's ever pressured to fly a broken airplane. If you have a question about anything, you can reach out to the maintenance team or base management or another pilot in a different base. We'll be able to help you out.
Awesome. It's great that you have that support system, and that leads into, can you talk a little about your core values?
Yeah, so we have what we call supply the high, and that is the integrity and compassion, selflessness, dedication, and enthusiasm, which is the embodiment of our Jamie Walker's vision for this company, a sense of community and caring for each other that really elevates our experience as workers and our experience for our customers.
Okay.
And we do, I don't know if anybody, you may have been to the NOC before, but at the NOC, we have an entire wall with all of our employees with their hands on the walls, painted on there to show our compassion and our love for each other at this company.
That's awesome. Now, Ari, what brought you back the second time?
Well, I thought life was grand when I was flying a G650ER around the world and dealing with an aircraft owner who was extremely rich. That interaction with a very wealthy individual was an aspect of the job that isn't for me. So I like the operational standpoint, the flying portion of it. And I felt that if I was going to go back to a charter operator, I was going to go back to a company where I was never asked to do anything that I was not comfortable with. I was never asked to have a pilot do something that I did not feel was the right thing to do. And I knew from the top down, from Jamie Walker down, that he was very, very supportive of the crew members, and that he was very supportive of everything I had done when I was here before. I left on good terms, and I decided, you know what? It's not about the size of the airplane or how far you can fly. It's about the people you work with and how comfortable you are in that environment. So I came back because of the people, because of Jamie Walker, not because I was going to be flying bigger and better airplanes. I've done that. I have 14 different type ratings. So I've flown many different aircraft. And I can surely say it's not the size of the aircraft, it's the type of operation and the dedication to safety and to customer service.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for this insight today. I really think that in watching the safety summit that you guys had the past couple days, that was what you just spoke to, Ari, was so evident in the transparency of your company and just the overall sense of family, and that you are one united front. And I thought that was just really, from an outside perspective listening in, it was just really rewarding to see the culture that you've fostered with it, your company. Well, guys, we are approaching our hour. Unless anyone has any last minute questions they would like to add, I would like to thank Ari and Jeff for being here today, for sharing your insight. For those of you that did have a question about maybe a position that wasn't open, you can see Jeff has added the email addresses for Ari and Jeff in that chat. So you'll be able to reach them after there if you have any questions. And looks like we're getting lots of thank yous to Ari and Jeff for attending today. So we appreciate your feedback and your insight and expertise, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And guys, this is the end of our session, but next week, if you have questions on maybe developing a search plan, choose next Friday at 2 p.m. We'll have Kit Darby to discuss that with us. But everyone have a great Friday, great weekend, and fly safe.